Crooked Tree Art Center in Traverse City. And for the first time, I'm actually sitting in the galleries, which is a super treat. I'm usually a little bit too animated to be doing a live anything I normally work up in that loft area up there. But since we don't open until noon, I can get away with being a little bit rambunctious. Not that I'm going to get rambunctious, but it's distracting to people who just want to browse through the gallery. Let's see, at the conclusion of this event, we will draw a name. I have attendees who registered through the Zoom, and one of you will receive a gift certificate to one of our two sponsors. So we have Higher Ground Trading Coffee in Traverse City and Central Perk, not Central Perk. That's Friends.
Yeah. We have Roast and Toast Coffee in Petoskey.
Oh my gosh, and I haven't even watched Friends in forever.
It's
so
in there,
I'm gonna pass it over to my colleague Liz, and then I'll introduce Zach.
Hi guys, thanks so much for joining us today. We're thrilled to be here with you. I am working on the fly out of the office today, but really wanted to be able to join you guys for this wonderful conversation and to meet our guest. So I just want to say a big thanks. When you're able, pop by our location in Petoskey. We've got 3 exhibitions going on, lots of festive decor and art available in our Art Tree Sales Gallery and classes going on. So hope that you can come by and see us in person. And once again, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, so I had the pleasure of meeting Zach. We met at the lovely Black Market Coffee, and any of you in Traverse City who knows Black Market Coffee, go and support them as much as possible because there's some changes coming there. But Zach and I had a great conversation, and full disclosure, my background is ceramics, and to be able to sit down with Zach and just connect and talk, it was really invigorating. I went home and I told my husband, that's it, I'm going back to school, I'm going to go to NMC, I'm going to start taking ceramics again. And I think you're really going to be inspired. I especially loved Zach's ideas, which he's going to have an opportunity to talk about the community of ceramic artists and what we learned with our Coffee at 10 a couple weeks ago. And we already knew this, but it was just reaffirming. We have a large community of ceramic artists in Northern Michigan. So the more we can get everybody together, the better. So with that, I'm gonna introduce you to Zach Tate.
Hi. So I am Zach Tate. Nice to meet you all. And this is my second year here at NMC. And let's see, gosh, I guess I've been teaching now at the collegiate level for 10 years, which is kind of crazy. That includes grad school. So yeah, it's kind of nuts. I'm happy to be here though. It's a good place.
Yeah, we're happy to have you here too. So Zach, why don't you step back a little bit and talk to us about how you started out in ceramics and especially some of those interesting opportunities that you were open to having. That was one of the things that I was really excited about, is you made yourself very available. So why don't you start a little bit in the beginning, and then we'll bring everybody up to speed.
Right. So I'm originally from Southern Missouri, and it's not really known as being an art mecca or for creating really great artists or anything. But I was really fortunate to have some really fantastic teachers starting out. My first really great art experience was actually middle school. I was introduced to an art club basically because I needed something to do for after school activity, so I didn't get in trouble. And I think the first art club meeting we had, the teacher's name was Kevin Smith. He had a big ball of clay for everyone and handed it to all of us and said, all right, make something. And so he showed us how to make pinch pots and coil pots. From there, I was completely hooked. That was, I was in 5th grade. And that just kind of sparked my interest from there on. So I had always kind of been in and out of art, not really given it much thought that it could be a professional career or anything. And whenever I graduated high school, I had applied to all these colleges in the U.S. I had I was top 10 in my class for GPA and was like going to go on and be a science major somewhere or a psychology major or something that seemed logical. And it's kind of a weird happening, but I was rejected from every single college I applied to. And the reason is my college transcript, or my high school transcripts, were wrong. My high school messed up my transcripts, and it showed that I was missing like most classes you needed to graduate. So it looked like I never took an English class, or I was missing science classes.
Oh my gosh.
It was, I can assure you, one of the most crushing feelings I've ever had in my entire life. I was like, what? Like, because I didn't know what happened at first. I was like, what did I do wrong?
Right.
You know, that kind of thing. So Missouri has this really interesting program called A+, and it's a program that if you have a certain GPA, it's like a 2.5 GPA in high school, 90% attendance record, and then you do community service, which is non-court issued.
Okay. Thanks for clarifying.
It can be an important distinction that you can go to any 2-year college in the state of Missouri at no cost to the student. And so I was eligible for that. I had already signed up for that just because I did. I don't know why. It turns out it was a great move for me. So I went to, I started enrolling in all these community colleges that were nearby. And the one I chose to go to was called Ozarks Technical Community College. And it was in Springfield, Missouri, about 2 hours from my house. So I moved to Springfield, started college about a week after graduating from high school. I was just ready to move on with my life.
Yeah.
And again, I was bound and determined to do something useful with my life, science, political science, something like that. And I just went through, took all the basic classes, English, math, whatever. And I saved the humanities credit, the art credit, for the last semester I was there. And so in that last semester, I had a professor by the name of Bob Dreyer, and I was taking this art appreciation class, and I was not paying attention, and I was drawing in class one day, making caricature sketches of people in the room. And Professor Dreyer walked up behind me and asked, what the hell was I doing? And I sheepishly said I wasn't paying very good attention, apparently. And he took my sketchbook and looked at it and said, this is really good. What are you doing in art appreciation? And I said, getting my last couple credits so I can graduate and move on. And he said, what's moving on for you? And I said, maybe Missouri State, maybe Missouri University, maybe University of Illinois. I don't know. But something, a school with a good science or psychology background is what I'm looking at. And he goes, nah, I don't think so. What? He said, you should be an art major. I said, I don't know. There's not a career. You can't do anything with it. And he said, no, actually there is. And so he sat down, talked to me about it. And in about 10 minutes, I changed my major.
Oh, wow.
And he completely changed the curriculum for me for that semester and said, I'm going to give you an art curriculum. He was a retired professor from Drury University, and he used to teach ceramics and drawing there. And he said, I'm going to give you a drawing curriculum for this semester. And you're going to do this, and then you're going to transfer to Missouri State University, and I'm going to call the chair there. We're going to get you a scholarship to transfer, and you're going to be just fine. And that's what happened.
That is so inspiring. Zach, I want to let you know that amongst our attendees today, we have Jim Beckering's ceramics class. So this is a high school group. So I think it's really inspiring to hear those early steps of how you got started.
Yeah, it was pretty wild. Yeah, I mean, I don't know where I would be if I would have gotten into the other colleges I applied to. It was just sort of I got lucky. And I was really fortunate to be at a community college because they're very open and receptive to people basically changing their mind every other week on what they want to do with their lives. So that was pretty great for me. And when I got to Missouri State, it was one of the most amazing programs I could have asked for. It's a very underrated program, probably the top art program in the state of Missouri. But since Missouri is Missouri, no one really cares. So the professors I had were Kevin Hughes and Keith Extam, and they were some of the most humble and inspiring people I've ever been around. And they really changed my perspective on not just art, but just on the world and how to approach the world and how to present myself to other people and how to sort of give myself more respect and other people around me more respect. And so it was a really great holistic experience for me to learn how to be an artist, not just how to make work, but how to actually be an artist. And that was a really important distinction for me to understand. And then from there, like, oh, go ahead.
Oh, well, I just want to ask you, you were introduced to art quite young, but it also a little stumbling block could be if your family is supportive of pursuing the arts. And so how was was your family open to this? Because you were open to the idea of the transition.
Right. They're still skeptical. So,
oh, darn it.
Yeah. I mean, I come from a family of educators and farmers. So if you weren't teaching, you were herding cattle, kind of thing. And I've done all of the above in my life to pay the bills at some point or other. And even after, I had international residencies, I was getting grants, got into grad school, all that kind of great stuff. And my family was still rather skeptical. It wasn't until probably my first job at a university that they kind of were like, you can maybe make a living on this. But even then, they weren't quite sure how sustainable that was. But I mean, they didn't say no. They definitely were just always, they're glass half full people. So they always wanted me to have like 3 backup plans.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But
that's fair.
Yeah, it was fair. A little hard sometimes, but in some ways it kept me grounded, and the route to becoming an artist or a faculty member at a college or university, there's a lot of adversity you go through. So the ability to be nimble enough to think ahead, 2 or 3 steps ahead.
Not including this year.
Well, this year's, I'm throwing everything out the window.
Yeah. Before we start talking about this year, will you talk a little bit about some of those international experiences that you did have?
Right. So my last year at Missouri State University was actually right before the economic crash. So I've lived through multiple interesting experiences since becoming an adult, including multiple recessions at this point. And so my professors actually encouraged me to write my very first grant, which was to move to Taiwan and to become a resident artist there for 6 months. And so they helped me write the grant. I received the grant. It was called the Asian Studies Initiative Program, and it was a grant through the state of Missouri. And basically the state paid for me to go to Taiwan and live there for 6 months. And so I was a resident artist at the Tainan National University of the Arts. And it was, I think I was 22 years old maybe. And so it was a pretty wild experience to be a kid from Southern Missouri, basically never traveling, outside of the state most of his life, and to move to a country where no one spoke my language. And for me to I learned Mandarin in about 6 months because I didn't have much of a choice. There was a lot of broken English spoken, and there was a few folks that could speak it, but they weren't with me all the time. So I had to learn enough to get by. And that was a pretty awesome experience. I learned also at that point that not everything you make is good. I made a lot of bad art. I still make a lot of bad art, but the experience was really invaluable because I feel like some of those things are still filtering through my mind. And that's 15, 16 years ago. So it was a pretty wild experience to be able to reflect upon. And then after that, I moved back to the States. I moved to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and took a job as a technician there at a college and at a nonprofit. And then I was offered a job in Denmark, and I took that job as a technician at the International Ceramic Research Center. And I did that till my visa ran out. And they said, you could stay if you had a terminal degree in your field. And I said, you mean like a master's? And they said, well, master's in fine art. And I said, okay, so how do you do that? So I basically talked to a bunch of people, figured out how to put together an application, and spent my fall and winter putting together applications for graduate school. And with all my international experience, exhibitions, I was very fortunate. I received 6 offers to go to grad school, and 4 of those were fully funded.
Oh, wow.
So I was lucky, and I was able to basically pick where I wanted to go, and I chose to go to Texas. Some of that being that most graduate programs, the idea, at least to me, was that they would be a supplemental to the things I'd already done in my life. So something outside of the Midwest, something outside of what I was used to and familiar with. And I went to teaching schools that were really focused on education and about making people teachers. So I wanted to go to a research school. So I chose Texas Tech, which was a research institution. And basically they paid me to research and to teach. And then also obviously to get my master's. So I spent 3 years there writing grants, traveling more, putting together symposiums and exhibitions, bringing in artists. It was really my first opportunity to be sort of an administration position, even as a grad student. One of the faculty went on sabbatical, and instead of hiring someone, they put me into that position. Probably should have fought for some more pay, but I didn't. I was just happy for the experience. But it worked out really well. And then from there, I got a job at the University of Notre Dame out of grad school, and I moved to Indiana, which was not really on the radar. I actually planned to go back to Europe, but I couldn't say no to a job. So,
right.
Yeah.
A lot of grant writing experience. I think that's that could be a whole nother conversation that we could have. I think there are a lot of hidden opportunities out there, but people just, don't really have the knowledge, or, because when you did the Taiwanese experience, that wasn't necessarily a ceramics grant. That was a grant. So you were able to look at that and interpret how you could make that work for ceramics. And I think that's important. So,
well, I think one thing that people forget, and this is when like high school students are looking at going to college, is a lot of kids that are into art want to go to like one of the art institutes, like Kansas City, Chicago, Memphis, whatever. And they're all great schools. The problem with them, in my opinion, and this is as an educator, as an artist, is that you lose valuable experience. Like you don't have as many English classes. And I know people, when you go to college, you're like, oh, I got to take these classes I took in high school again. The amazing thing about it is you'll have faculty and professors that will profoundly change the way you look and think at things. And I found out later in life that I'm slightly dyslexic. I've got a few LDs that I've figured out over time. But going and having these really intensive English classes in college made a subject that I dreaded in high school to one of my favorite subjects.
That's interesting.
It was. I mean, I learned how to be a better writer. I started reading more interesting things. I didn't know who, Albert Camus was. So being exposed to different things that were outside of what my circle of education had prior been was really important to me. And all those things have fed into my experiences as far as an artist and also as a teacher too. So I encourage students to really look at education as a whole opportunity, how science could play a role in how you draw or paint, anything like that. So all those experiences gave me sort of the knowledge to know how to write grants. When I was at Notre Dame, I wrote a lot of grants that were based in the science department, because ceramics has a huge science component, physics, chemistry, organic chemistry, all that kind of stuff. And so I was able to get a lot of money from my department through other departments by talking about the efficacy of what I'm doing as a researcher.
Love it.
So my video kicked out. So sorry about that, guys, but I am still here. I think that's great that you brought that up again. Because I want to address that, especially I think just knowing that we have some young artists amongst our attendees today. I'm curious if you could talk a little bit more about your flexibility and willingness to work through all these different kinds of learning environments, because as you mentioned, that must have been really frustrating to realize that the opportunities that you thought were going to be available to you weren't, because of that crazy transcript error. And then how you just rolled with it, right? And what were the pros and cons to you for community college, and how did you keep science part of what you were doing?
So I would say that I'm one of those people that has sort of, I call it like a shotgun blast of interests. For me, the art is always right in the middle, but there's always been science or psychology, or, there's now English and writing and all this kind of stuff. So I basically, the way I kind of tried to deal with it on my own was to, I had a goal, and my goal was to get out of my hometown. That was the first and foremost goal. Once that goal was satisfied, I had to figure out what I wanted to do with my life, what was the purpose. And I kind of have an overarching goal or idea that I just want to do something that makes a positive difference in the world. And then everything else is sort of, how do you get to that point? And for me, the most viable way of doing that was to be an artist. Eventually, that was what I came to. So once that became kind of centralized, everything sort of feeds into that. So when I do any other, even here, when I do committee work, I look at how working with other faculty member to figure out a simple problem on campus could actually benefit me as an artist, or benefit my department, or benefit my students. So I just try to have that philosophy as, here's what I'm doing, and here's how it affects this, and how does it affect the goal that I want. And sometimes they're really far stretches, but they really allow my brain to kind of think outside the box and things. And I think it's maybe a better problem solver over time.
Yeah, well, it's just an artistic way of solving a problem, right? I mean, it's making it art.
Right. And my mom, she actually was, she was the founder of a vocational school in my hometown. And so she was really big on pulling students out of the high school into the vocational program, giving them either a GED or a high school diploma so they could, you know, get a job as a drywaller or as a mason or whatever. So I think some of her ability to think that way really influenced me very indirectly. My mom is not, no one in my family that I know of, other than like third or fourth cousins, are creative whatsoever. So everyone thinks I'm kind of the milkman's baby. But I really can see like lines and correlations the way I operate, very similar to those in my family, which is pretty interesting how how I express it, which is through art, and how they express it, which is, you know, through education or writing. It's pretty, I don't know, I find it pretty fun to look at.
Yeah. So you came back to Indiana, or you moved to Indiana, and you were working at Notre Dame. And then is that when the nonprofit came into being?
Right. So in 2014, I took the job at the University of Notre Dame, or 2013. I lose track of time at this point. Anyways, the job was great. It was teaching and research, but I found myself living in a community that was in need of some things. So Elkhart County, which is where I was living at the time, during the last recession, had 25% unemployment. It was the worst in the nation. And it's a very diverse population, a lot of Latinos, there's a lot of manufacturing, things like that. And I noticed a lot of students were missing out on things because the school's budget has been slashed so hard. You know, taxes are really weird in Indiana. So the way the schools would get money was based on, you know, property tax was capped. I mean, this is where my poli-sci part of me comes in. So I get really into policy and understanding how these things kind of affect my life. And what I found was that the art programs of the high school were being cut. And that was then hurting the local colleges and also making, I felt like, Indiana, Northern Indiana, less interesting to live in because kids weren't having an opportunity to do art. And so my wife and I decided to start a nonprofit called Goshen Youth Arts, which was a nonprofit group that worked with at-risk teens for after-school art programming. Goshen High School, Elkhart High School, they're Title I schools. They have free and reduced lunches. They get a lot of federal funding to help out with just basic needs. And, you know, basic needs, they don't really consider to be art. So that's where we felt like we could step in and help out with the schools and provide just art opportunities and classes for kids. And so we did that for really until I moved up here. We passed on the organization, and then the recession, unfortunately, I think has probably ended the nonprofit. But for 6 years, we worked with the high school, the middle school, elementary kids. We worked with the jails to actually help with students that were in and out of the juvenile detention center. We worked with special needs students out of ADAC, which was a special needs group, a nonprofit group that had home houses for students. Yeah, we did everything that we could to try to raise money to make classes free or near free for all students. We just believed that art should not be something that students should have to pay for, but should be an experience that everyone has the opportunity for. And the goal wasn't just to make artists, but to create people that could think outside the box, be nimble thinkers, people that could think in a diverse setting. And that was what we felt like we were able to do.
Because clearly creative thinking, I mean, we both, I'm sure many people in attendance here feel that we know it's so important, but it's not always something that's found locally in the schools. So kudos to you for making that happen. We have lots of questions starting to come in and nice compliments and comments for you. So we're going to want to start talking about your art because we have some students at Boyne City High School who have looked at images of your mugs online, and they think they're pretty cool. So how many have you made? And let's start talking a little bit about your artwork.
Sure. So art-wise, like the really funky looking mugs, that's something pretty new. I used to, traditionally, I guess I'm a sculptor, but since I use clay, I know the vernacular of the functional object. So I would say probably 2 or 3 years ago, I got really interested in the ability to make a functional vessel, but still had a lot of sculptural elements in it. And so what I found that was kind of fun about that is that it allowed more people to enter into the sculpture, and it didn't alienate as many people. Sculpture has a way of being, I guess, highbrow, or a way that sort of makes people kind of standoffish, whereas pottery or ceramics has a craft element to it. Functional object is something that we all have a relationship with, whether, it's something that's funky and weird like this, or much more traditional, like a normal cup, right? And so there's a language that we all understand with that. There's the handle, the foot, the interiors, all that kind of thing, the way it holds the material, like coffee or tea or whatever. And so, I started using that language to make some of these new vessels, which were really divergent from some of the old political satire work that I'd been doing. And slowly that work is beginning to kind of find a new vein, a new message. So it's been really fun to work with in the last couple of years.
Yeah, so I can share those images if you want to talk about some of the pieces.
Sure.
Oh, that's all right. Does that look large here, or is it still?
No, I see a thumbnail.
You see a thumbnail.
Well, Kristi is getting that going. Zach, I know we want to look at your work. I'm dying to hear you talk about it. But so how did you end up in Little Northern Michigan?
So my job at Notre Dame, actually, it ended after 4 years. It was a provisional visiting faculty position, and the college began to sort of restructure. There's a lot of retirements and non-retirements. So they were really looking at how they wanted younger faculty, newer faculty to kind of be in there. And my position was essentially eliminated. So I actually ended up at the Indiana University, IU, South Bend for a year. And it was another visiting professor position, this time in sculpture. And it was in the spring semester that this job came up. And I thought, hey, there's a teaching job in ceramics, and it's not in Indiana. This sounds pretty good. So I applied. I had applied to several jobs that year, and I was, again, fortunate to be offered a few positions. This is the one I settled on, partly because it is a community college. Working at a research school, working at a university, those are all really fun, great experiences. But working at a school whose mission is to work with the community and to be community-minded is something that I felt was really enticing. And so this was, I felt like a really perfect fit for me.
That's awesome. It's a really great little program over there at North Central, North. They're in Michigan.
It's amazing. When I walked up, and so this is a weird thing. So when I walked up for the interview and came up to our building, I was completely dumbfounded. It is an amazing piece of architecture. It is a Walter Beardsley inspired building, who, if you don't know who that is, he worked with the Bauhaus. Sorry, not Walter Beardsley. He was he was one of the lead guys there. Come back to me later. If you look at Bauhaus architecture, this is part of that history. And they built this building specifically for the art department in 1972. Teaching at Texas Tech, Notre Dame, Indiana University, 3 really phenomenal schools with a lot of money. Never at any of those times did I ever teach or work in a building that was made for the art department. They were always secondary or tertiary buildings that were taken over from a warehouse, or it was a pole barn, or whatever. And I was amazed that a community college in Northern Michigan actually footed the bill to make an amazing building for their art department.
Yeah, you can't see me, but I've got a big head nod going on over here. Yeah. Kristi, you want to share that work again? And then also we have a chat comment. I don't know where you're located at the studio right now, Zach. If we have the opportunity, would you be able to show us that space after we look at your work?
I'm on my desktop computer. Sorry.
Bummer. All right, another time.
Our website's updated with some images on it here at the college, so you guys should check that out. We're trying to showcase more some of those amazing things that we have, like our studios and faculty and that kind of thing. So if you go to our website, nmc.edu, and look for the art department, you should be able to find some images on there.
And I noticed Instagram has, there was a neat little reel for the printmaking. So I'm excited to see that. Can you guys see the screen?
Yeah, that looks great, Kristi.
Okay, good. All right, so Zach, I'll let you talk about your pieces as I scroll through.
Sure. So this was one I did right after the last election. So I mentioned my work was fairly socio-political. So this was kind of that beginning of making functional objects. This is a large platter that's about 2 feet wide by 2 feet
That's
tall
big.
and 6 inches deep. It's actually in the permanent collection of the American Ceramics Museum in LA. And it actually has a drawing there of Betsy DeVos, Smokey the Bear, and a print of Ralph Wiggum. So I like to mix socio-political commentary with pop culture. It kind of dates myself, the fact that Ralph Wiggum, I think, is like a pop culture icon. And then Smokey the Bear, I don't know. There's a lot of layers to the work. I try to make the work kind of like an onion, in the notion that there's kind of something at all these different layers for everyone. And the deeper you get into it, sometimes the more it smells, which is okay.
Beautiful. I love it. So underglazes and any other techniques on this piece that we should bring up?
Just underglazes. That's it. Yeah.
Okay.
I use a lot of commercial stains and underglazes, and earthenware mostly.
Nice. That's a big platter.
So this is one of those early cups where I was trying to figure out ways to blend sculpture and function together. And I forget, this is in a private collection somewhere. I forget. It got purchased a few years ago from a gallery. But it's a piece based on the presidential run of Bernie Sanders in 2016. And it did a lot of series based upon each political figure that year. So there's a Hillary Clinton, there's a Bernie Sanders, there's a Donald Trump, there's a Ted Cruz, there's all these various figures. And I was really interested just in the way people were looking at these figures, and they were becoming something more than just a politician, but they were becoming more like celebrity figures, which is a really interesting turn in our culture, that politics and celebrity are becoming mixed and sometimes even confused. And I found that to be a really interesting duality.
All right.
And so this is kind of this skull series I've been doing the last couple of years. And I was traditionally, like I said, a sculptor and worked a lot with the figure. And what I found was interesting was that people would always have some critique about the figure. It looks too much like them. It doesn't look enough like them, or it's too this or too that or whatever. And I began to sort of distill that down a little bit to being what are the basic elements of like a human object or figure. So, you know, there's a common lexicon or common notion or idea of what the skull or sort of the armature of what the human body is. And I found that to be a really fun idea to kind of play around with. And it's something that we all can kind of look at and recognize. It doesn't have to be perfect. You can just kind of look at it and go, oh yeah, that's a human skull or a human head, or it references those things. And then the imagery and objects around it sort of help complete or tell a narrative. The monarch butterfly, it relates to the environment. I have a 5-year-old daughter who is obsessed with butterflies, and she loves monarchs. And so for me, it became a really interesting correlation that myself finding the monarchs is a representation of our environment, and her finding just pure beauty and astoundment and watching one like come out of the chrysalis. I don't know, it became a really interesting common ground for me to sort of draw with my daughter. So you'll find a lot of butterflies in my work.
Yeah, and for me, I've done some work with butterflies, and that whole metamorphosis process, there's a whole psychological level there that I can go into. So let's see.
And this is the back side of the cup. So this is a drawing of myself in underglaze. I also, early on, before I got into ceramics, did a lot of drawing. And I've been trying to find these ways to kind of marriage those two ways of making art. So the 2D and the 3D, and putting those together. And for years, they've not made any sense. So I'll have a whole body of work that's drawing or printmaking, and another body of work that's all about ceramics. And they're now starting to find ways to kind of meld together. And it's been really fun, but also really difficult, because the way your brain processes 2D and the way your brain processes 3D, they're on different sides. And so they're always in conflict as the maker. And I'm sure as the viewer, they are too. So it's been a really fun technical chore to find a way to make them make sense and not look like they just were slashed together. yeah, so that's
yeah, no, it definitely makes sense, but I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, the integration is really working for me, though. I think you're hitting it. Do you know, before I moved to Northern Michigan, I was in Indiana as well. Do you know artist Sigrid Zahner at Purdue University?
Yeah, I know Sig. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. This piece sort of reminds me of her. That was like, these two guys need to connect. So.
Oh yeah,
Awesome.
no, I've been down to Purdue. She's great.
Yeah. Sweet.
And so also trying to find ways to make work that's more, I use the word pedestrian and people take that as a negative, but everyday lived experiences, weather, changes, metamorphosis, all those kind of things. So living up here, oddly enough, I find to be much more invigorating than living in Northern Indiana weather-wise. Everyone's like, oh, it's, there's so much more snow. And my comment to them is always, yeah, but it stays in the ground. Living in the southern half of the Great Lakes region, it'll be 5 degrees or negative 10 degrees one day, and then 2 days later it's 35 or 40. And here I found like it was much more consistent. And so like, I feel like the seasons were much more evenly segregated, at least as far as the visual effects to them. And so I did a whole series on rain and snow, rainbows, cloudy days, that kind of thing. And they were just sort of observational pieces that were just kind of talking about how I was feeling or how the weather is making me react to the pieces, which then kind of got back into the political conversation about environment and place. So yeah, for me, it always sort of swirls around in a big pool. I try not to be too shy about making work that's not directly correlated with my overall themes or ideas, because I do find that in time, they all sort of find a way to connect. And I think
they do.
Pretty interesting.
They do. All right, I'm going to stop sharing. There we go. So, so how has it been at NMC with COVID? What are students allowed to meet in person?
So the art department, we've got an exemption where we're able to let students meet here, albeit with reduced class sizes. So normally we'd have 16, 17 students in ceramics. We're down to anywhere between 5 and 10, somewhere in that nature, just to allow for social distancing. There are options to do some classes online, drawing, some of the painting, but we're finding that most students that do those are having a harder time really making that connection.
Right.
Even though they're getting the same pedagogy, same training, but that communal experience has been, it's been lacking, and it's been really interesting. Someday someone's gonna write about how that lack of communal activity has affected people psychologically. I know I can feel a difference in myself, and I can only imagine when you're trying to finish your education or work on, I can only imagine how that would affect or change the way you would view things. So
Absolutely. Good. I'm glad to hear that art students are allowed to, like you said, even though it's a smaller class, be in person. Clay's a little tough to do remote.
It's tough. I've got 2 students trying it, and I feel for them because they're just having a hard time. I mean, you can watch videos all day long, but just seeing someone do it, those little sleight of hand, like when you're trying to throw in the potter's wheel or whatever,
right.
It's really hard to explain. Well, this is what, offset your hands just a little bit. What do you mean offset a little bit? It's really hard.
Well, and like you said, being able to see other people working and have that, oh, I hadn't thought of that, or that's fantastic. So,
and there's a lot of learning that happens with students just watching each other and being around each other.
Right.
I always joke that I'm just a facilitator. I'm here to show the basics. I'm here to kind of be your spirit guide. But at the end of the day, I feel like most people end up learning most from their peers. And I'm not much older than most of my students, I mean, 10, 12 years is not that much of a gap. But whenever, there's just lived experiences I don't have. I'm not from the area. I don't know certain things. Dialects, various things are different. And someone will say something to someone else, and all of a sudden you'll just see it just click. And it's a really amazing, that aha moment. It's really pretty amazing to observe.
I was speaking with artist Lynn Denning, who teaches glass at before I said NCMC. So NCMC is the one in Petoskey, NMC is the one in Traverse City.
There you go.
Anyway, it was a great conversation about how important that community building aspect is through community colleges specifically. I mean, I think universities do that as well to a significant degree. But the way that artists can come together in that studio space and do that exchange, just like both of you were talking about, and learning from one another and keep coming back, that's something that I think you see in a community college campus in a different way, whereas in university, people are coming through and moving on. Sometimes in community, you'll keep coming back to that clay class to use that space, to have that community. Are you starting to see that, Zach, there?
Yeah, the gentleman before me, he just had a different style with which he was working with the community. And I'm much more of the big tent, big umbrella kind of thinker with that. So I really encourage some of our E's or adult education students or our students that are just here to audit a course to intermingle and take classes with the general population of degree seeking students, because I think it's such a rich and great environment to find both of them in, through life experiences, through just talking about art. Yeah, it's a pretty wild time, and it's almost like I have 4 or 5 extra teachers around because everyone's there sort of mentoring each other. And no one really oversteps those boundaries of like, I know better, da 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 da. It's just more of a very, it's a very professional setting, and it really helps raise that bar of what I think people think they can do and what I think that people can do, which I try not to dumb down ceramics 1 to ceramics anything. Like I want to speak at the same level to everyone, because I think everyone can understand and rise to that level and occasion if given the opportunity to do so. And that is, in general, my problem with most educational programs or systems is that there's a belief in some schools and some programs that you need to really distill and make it simple. Whereas I think that does a huge disservice, and it's really offensive, in my opinion, to people's intellectual abilities, because everyone has the ability to rise to that level given the time. I'm no savant and I'm no genius. But I feel like people have treated me like an adult most of my life, and that's allowed for me to act like an adult most of my life, which is to make the decisions that are right for me. And that goes through making art, through making life choices, whatever. So there's an amount of respect that I think can begin to happen whenever you start intermingling students of different generations together. So I'm a huge proponent of that. And that ceramics is a communal, it's a communal animal. We are communal people. I couldn't do painting and drawing full time because I had to be around people. And that would be at 3-4 in the morning making pots with other people. We'd be making pots of coffee in the ceramic studio and just be sitting up all night long talking and making really bad pottery. But they're still my friends. These are people from 15 years ago in college. And it's a pretty wild thing to think that was our one bonding experience. And it's kept us together from all that time. Yeah. So yeah, I'm interested to see all that things happening here and see that grow in our community.
What are some of your visions for starting to make that happen? What do you have in mind?
I've really opened our studio space up a lot. I'll try to take some images. Maybe I can send them to you. We can send them out to folks so they can see them. But
that'd be great.
Our space is very open, and it's very it's open partly because of COVID. It's also open, so hopefully in time people can really come in there and begin working all points in times during the day or evening together. So it really kind of invites that space. The second thing that happens in ceramics that is big besides the making is the firing. So I've spent most of the semester revamping our kiln studio. So we had an old gas kiln, which I rebuilt, and it's ready to rock and roll. I built a wood kiln back there, which I'm now waiting for the fire marshal to come and hopefully give me a stamp of approval. So we'll have a communal wood kiln, which I'm hoping to fire a couple times this semester, and use that as a teaching tool as well. I didn't know anything about how to fire a kiln when I got into ceramics, but there's a wood kiln about 30-40 miles from Missouri State, and I got involved in it, and it was one firing experience. Got me just into it. I was like, oh, this is awesome, fire. But 2, I was able to directly see the correlation between, here's a piece of wood, it holds X amount of BTUs. I put that into the kiln, it catches fire, and I can watch the pyrometer and watch the temperature go up. So it was a direct correlation for me, and I'm a concrete learner in that regards, of a physical activity putting something in the kiln and seeing a direct result of that. And then having the pots come out and seeing how they came out affected by that really drove home to me how the whole process works. And then as a science and math nerd, I was just like, oh, okay. There's an equation to talk about the heat coefficients and all this kind of stuff. So yeah, it really drove it home hard for me. So this is probably why I wanted to build new kilns.
Were any students participating in helping to rebuild the kilns, or is that something you've done on your own?
I've mostly done it on my own. I wanted it to be a special topics class. Being in the era that we are, there's always insurance concerns and worries. So the school is very apprehensive of that, which I'm lamenting. But I'm hoping that after this process gets done and they can see the fruits of the labor of this, that maybe they will allow me to have a little more space to build a few more kilns, maybe do some more special topics classes to talk about how to build kilns, alternative firing techniques, all that kind of stuff. So I'm hoping this is the Pandora's box to a lot more investigation too.
I think we do too. Yeah.
So to that end, we talking about kilns, we did have a question pop up a little while back from our high school class that's watching. They are asking, do you have a gas kiln for reduction firing at your college?
Yep, we do. Yep.
And then how much clay do your students fire in a year?
That's a great question. Let's see, what would the weight be? Well, I know last year we went through, and it's weird because of the COVID situation. I want to say one of the semesters we went through like 7 55-gallon barrels of clay in a semester.
Wow. So
that's a lot of clay. I encourage students to use a lot of material, but not to keep everything. Again, I really push as much as I can the craft element of things, that you want to make an object that is really maybe beautiful, but it's also meets the intention that you wanted it to. This is where maybe I sound snotty at times, but like, someone will make something that has a little S crack in the bottom and they're like, well, I'll make that into a planter. No, not in my class. Throw that thing away, make a planter that's going to be a planter. Don't try to do something else over to that. And part of that is also the experience of doing something. Like I said, I grew up on a farm, and there's always this notion, if you're going to do it right. And I want people to make objects that they're proud of at the end of the day. And also they have the skills to repeat that process again. So if you're just taking mistakes and just calling those the best you can do, I feel like that's a disservice to you as an artist, and a disservice to the material and medium as well too, that you should respect the medium as much as you should be respecting yourself. So I encourage students to really push those envelopes and to not settle for seconds and thirds, but to really push to make better objects.
Oh, you're so inspiring. I'm just taking it all in. As I'm working on some clay projects at home. So thank you for reminding me not to settle.
It's tough. And some of that, it'll serve you and others better in the future. If you start showing your work or exhibiting your work. I always make the joke that being from the Midwest, I suffer from aw shucksisms, which is I don't take compliments very well at all, still to this day. I've been in 70, 80 exhibitions, internationally speaking. I'm published in like 30 different magazines. I'm working on a book right now, and I don't handle compliments very well. And the way I can deal with that better is by making work that deserves the compliments. Work and work meaning writings or objects themselves, but work that I don't feel like I have to explain. That I can be proud of the fact that the object is a well-made object, and I hope that it conveys what I wanted to convey. And so some of that's a psychological thing, but I think it's, it serves you and it serves the community better to make objects that are better in the world.
Yeah. I'm not sure, would you mind just briefly touching on pricing? We had a conversation about mugs, and I've shared that story to an extent many times because I think it's important for our community to respect art. And I'll let you handle it because I'm not sure how much you want to share of that conversation. So that's why I'm kind of hedging here.
So, pricing is a really tough thing. And I've always struggled with it. Partly it's why I like selling work out of galleries. I can let them deal with it. But I really encourage students to price work aptly. And this is also why I encourage students to make good work. So if there's a crack or an imperfection, I'm not a big believer in a seconds and thirds pile. That goes in the trash heap. You need to make work that you want to represent you. And I always joke with students starting out that if a nuclear bomb went off and all of your work was sitting there ready to be bisque fired, it would be bisque fired after the explosion, but you wouldn't be there anymore. And the only thing left to speak for you would be the objects that you are actually leaving behind as an artist. And if those objects you're leaving behind you're not proud of, then they shouldn't be there anymore. And so same thing should go when you're selling your work. If you're not sure about it, then you shouldn't be pricing or selling your work, but you should also look at how you're pricing your work. If you're making mugs and selling them for $5 or $10 a piece, you're doing yourself a disservice, and you're doing the community a disservice, and you're doing the art world a disservice, because you're telling people that art isn't worth your time. Even if it takes you 5 minutes to make the mug, you got to think the material costs money. The firing process costs money, and all that time you spent thinking about the object, the time you spent cleaning the object up, you spent glazing it, and the time it sits in that kiln, that's all time that needs to be factored into how you price them. There are objects that are overpriced. I'm not going to argue with that. That's very true. But making sure that you get objects that you feel that you can be proud of is important. So, you know, I tell students to make mugs that are $20, $30 to start out with. And I'll push them on that. What's a $20 mug look like? You know, it looks like something that's comfortable to hold. The glaze is on there properly. The bottoms are cleaned up. You're not going to scratch a table by using it. And then from there, you can begin pushing it. And once you start selling things at that level, it tells you that all of a sudden people value it at that level. So then it's start time to like think about moving it up a little bit. Maybe it's a $30 mug. Maybe it's a 40, 50, whatever.
Right.
You have to kind of test those waters. And starting low is fine, but you need to be nimble and be able to adjust on that.
Right.
And my work has been that way my entire career, that I've always undervalued it, and it sells, and I'm really happy. And then I start thinking, I still can't pay my rent, or I can't pay my mortgage, or I can't buy lunch. So maybe I should start raising it. And then eventually there's a coefficient and a line that you can draw where you're still making the same amount of money, maybe if not more, but you're making less as far as the objects.
Right.
But that means you're finding that ground, that happy medium.
Yeah, no. Yeah,
So
I think it's important that as a community, we need to respect what it takes to make art and not sell ourselves short. So I share that all the time, and I'm glad you shared that with me. We have somebody asking, where is your art for sale?
So on the occasion, I do have an Etsy site that I'll put stuff on that's just like, I've made a lot of whatever, and okay, I can sell it there. There are a few galleries that sell my work. One is the M.F.A project in Chicago, Companion Gallery, which is in Tennessee, Red Lodge, which is in Montana. Those are the three that mostly carry my work, but I also do a lot of exhibitions where I'll send work out for juried exhibitions or even some solo shows. Currently, there's nothing local, but I'm trying to get more involved in the gallery scene here. So hopefully you can find my stuff around town. And I try to make work at different price points.
There's a couple people here that, especially on this conversation, that we could help you out at Crooked Tree. So,
awesome.
So stay tuned, everybody.
Yeah, I like that.
And I just tried to find you on Etsy really quick to throw in the chat. Do you have anything on your Etsy site right now, or?
There's a few pieces on there right now. I had a sale that was part of a pottery tour, like for the region that couldn't go face to face, so we did it digitally probably 2 months ago, and it was really, really great experience.
All right, I'm going to share that Etsy link in the chat right now for everybody. But hopefully we can announce in the near future that you can buy his art at Crooked Tree Art Center. So we do have 2 locations.
I'm down with that. That'd be awesome.
Yeah, we would be too.
So you guys, we're just about out of time. So if there's any final questions, please make sure you put them in the chat. I have one that has potential to take too long, but really quickly, Zach, thinking about your work and all of the various components that you've discussed with us today, I'm curious, how much are you thinking and planning your work when you create it, or how much is it sort of evolving organically or intuitively as you work?
It's kind of a mixed bag. I kind of come up with an overarching theme or idea that I want to work or tackle on. Right now I'm working and thinking about tension. And that's an overarching theme between physical tension and also communal tension, you know, socio-political, living in different communities, that kind of thing. And then I'll just, everything else from there comes out pretty organically. I'll start making objects, and I have a sketchbook. And your art teachers may slap me for saying this, but I don't sketch out my ideas. I have general ideas or thoughts, mostly glaze formulations. But everything, I feel like if I sketch it out, it kind of loses the magic. It's found a home, and it doesn't need to be made anymore. And I'm not excited about it. So what I do is I just make the objects. I don't make maquettes. I just start. And I use a lot of source material. So I'll print off images, do a lot of research based on, you know, watch videos. How does the face look at this pose or whatever, you know? And then I'll just start. And I love the question of how do I do this? If I know the answer, I'm not going to do it. There's a technical question I want to answer, and then a philosophical question I want to answer in my work. And there's a really fun magic that happens in the middle of that. A former colleague of mine, Bill Kramer at the University of Notre Dame, used to say it's when you lose time. And I love that idea that you don't know what time it is anymore. You start at 8 in the morning and then it's 8 at night, and you haven't eaten, you haven't done anything except for make all day long. And it may be a terrible thing you've made, it may be horrible, but that experience is a real happening in its own right. And I think that's something that non-artists don't always understand, is that the objects that we show are curated from a bunch of really crappy objects that we don't ever want to show. But they're all equally as important, because each failure leads to a future success. You know, I always tell my students, an F in my class on a project is only a failure in the making of the object, not in everything that you've gained and learned in that. So you may completely blow every single project in the class, but you still may make a B or an A in my class because you're fighting, you're working, and you're not giving up, and you're trying to solve these problems. And I can respect that with anyone, artist, non-artist, that will devote their time to not giving up on a process or an idea. And eventually it'll work out. But you know, art is not for the faint of heart.
I think that's a perfect way to end. I don't know. What do you think, Liz?
Yeah, I think it's a beautiful way to end. Thank you, Zach.
I know, that was a great answer. All right, so I will do the drawing here. Let's see, I know everyone's dying to see this drawing. So let's
and I feel
see.
I'm bad. I'm no help. I tried to type on my phone here. It's a little clumsy, so I'll try.
Oh, we got a fellow clay artist, Clay Moss.
Hey, there we go.
Yeah, so Clay, I know where you're at. I will connect with you, and I'm assuming you're going to choose Higher Ground Trading right here in Traverse City. So congratulations, Clay. Lots of thank yous rolling in. Zach, thanks for hanging out with us. And I did have a couple people second the idea to a grant conversation where we just talk about different grants. So maybe we could create a panel of other artists and have a conversation about grant writing. So stay tuned, everybody. Yes. Oh, more people saying yes to more in grants.
Yep.
And yeah, I think we can make that happen.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Zach. It was a true pleasure to get a chance to meet you through this forum. So I'm excited to be in TC and connect in person sometime.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I really appreciate it. And
yeah, thanks a lot.
To contact. Absolutely.
Thanks. And thanks to everybody who was on this Coffee at 10 when we were kind of floundering. So I'm sorry you witnessed that. And I'm glad that you stuck with us. It looks like most of you hung in there. So I'm going to upload this to YouTube. So if you have friends or our students that are here, if you want to share this with other classes or other classmates, that will be on YouTube, and I will have the link on the website. So with that, thanks everybody.
Awesome.
Thanks guys. Bye.